Welcome back to Park Media Interlude, Vince and Sergio. It is Tuesday, October
27th,
I believe.
Yeah, I think so. A few days away.
Fucking A. Serge has been hard at work downstairs in the park space working on his documentary, which he started filming in
2015.
No shit, it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, I'm super pumped about that. What are you doing down here, Serge?
I'm extremely pumped about it.
Wow.
For the time being, because the work hasn't kicked in yet.
How many hours of footage do you have?
I got probably around 250, maybe 300 hours of everything, interviews,
And
regular
now-
footage.
Now the goal is to cut that down to what? 90 minutes?
90 minutes.
Right on. 200 hours down to 90 minutes.
So
that's what you're down here doing.
yeah, so it's the part of the process. So initially it's obviously when you're planning, when you're filming, and when you're reviewing the footage, is the euphoric stage of it. And then once you identify your themes, so I'm going through each character and I'm identifying all the themes within each character. Then I'm going to put all those themes together, see the ones that overlap and ones that don't, and then basically fit it into the line of themes. And then you start basically cutting, making sequences, and then seeing how those sequences fit. And that's more of a, so once you get into this editing part, cuts and putting sequences together, that's more of like a technical and a skill-based thing. So that's like basically the most stressful part. So I'm still in the euphoric part.
Yeah. And it's not like you went to school for this.
No, I have not.
You're self-taught.
For sure. Well, just like majority of people nowadays. I mean, you see some incredible work. I mean, just from the cell phones, stuff that people are able to make. It's just really incredible.
Yeah.
So it's it's what Coppola said, that first, filmmaking was like a technical, skillful job. Now it's, since what he said, 8mm was available to people, now it's more of an art form.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, he has a very proletariat view of how
it is.
Film should be
very egalitarian.
Thought about. Yeah, egalitarian.
Because it's true, because then you kind of, because if, if you tell somebody, oh, you didn't go to school or you didn't do this and therefore you're not a filmmaker or whatever you meant, that's kind of, it's not a good thing.
Yeah, the tough thing, well, I think, how do I say this? In the age of COVID, I guess, what can you say? You can make independent film, put it on your website, put it on social media, get it out to your audience, and, try hopefully that it spreads. I guess the only difference is, the part that sucks is that you're unable to have that kind of, the cool collective experience you have going to a place and, sitting down and there's 30, 40, 100, 150, depending on the theater size. You watching a movie together and then you get to do like a Q&A after and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, no, it is cool because these days you do have the ability to just put it out. I mean, I would like to see more people doing that. I mean, I think when we would hold documentary film screenings at Park, I think the ideal situation would be to have local filmmakers come in, bring their own movies, films, whatever it may be, shorts, feature length, and screen them here. And that's the thing. I mean, this is to get this across to people, I think is really important, because it's like all too often we're consuming all of this culture. I mean, and one of the things I think we should take away from the 60s generation, I know it's very popular on the left to bash the 60s now, but I am going to hold out, and because reading about that counterculture is what got me thinking about things, and so I always have a soft spot for that stuff. But, I think that attitude, to take that away from that, and then cultural movements after that, or even before that, like the Dadaists.
Yep. Cubists.
The Cubists, yeah. The surrealists to some degree, definitely the existentialists. But there's all kinds of art movements where it's like the people, are like from the ground up making this art and taking it out of the museums and the highfalutin galleries and the, professional ivory towers and bringing it down to the people. But at the same time, it's tough because if you get some of that institutional recognition, it allows your work to go so much further.
Which you can do. I mean, then that's the thing. That's why you have film institutes. That's why you have film festivals, and usually have institutes in certain film festivals. Like Cannes, they have their own institute. Sundance, they have their own institute. So you can send they love finished products because then that means less money for them to spend doing the editing and all that stuff and more concentrating on producing that. And, and then, but you can still send. There's a lot of places, all kinds of film festivals that you can send, and they're still going to hold it. It's going to be online, obviously, which is whatever. But nonetheless, I mean, that's once you get there, they're going to be able to support you in terms of financially and professionally and help you to get your film out if they like it, obviously.
All right. Well, I ask you these questions officially on air because people might assume that just because Sergio and I live together that we are, and that's not actually true. I mean, I think if people have been to the space, there's 2 apartments upstairs, and so there's actually 2 separate apartment rooms and buildings and bathrooms and all that. So
space downstairs.
Plus the space downstairs, and lately Sergio has been down here like a mad scientist, just doing his thing. So
tool space.
I'm able to check in with him and ask him questions because I don't get to well, I do. I guess I could. But
in the evening, we usually
be better to ask now during the
congregate
show.
For meals.
So, how about I was talking with I was talking with Brandon called this afternoon, a friend of ours, Brandon, and he had mentioned how much he loved the Borat movie, the new one.
Yeah.
And Sergio and I watched it, and we laughed our asses off. I mean,
cried.
Yeah, cried, belly laughing for like 90 minutes. I mean, there were some parts, of course, that I didn't think was hilarious, but like it was like a 9 out of 10. It was like I give it an A, 9 out of 10, 4 stars, all that stuff. I mean, 2 thumbs up. It's like, it's so funny. It was awesome. And I don't understand how people could hate on it. I mean, some of the critiques I saw of it were really silly, which actually is a great segue into the next thing that I know we wanted to talk about today. But getting back to the positive elements of the movie, it's fucking hilarious. You should watch it. I want to watch it a second time. And I think the guy's brilliant,
He is. And first off, I would definitely call it a highly intellectual film, extremely intellectual film. Number 1, the approach to it. Number 2, the comparisons. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, that was funny because he points out all the these Western, what's the term for it, ideas of what those cultures are, and he takes those elements, and he brings them here, and he shows that here it might be a little bit different, but the things are the same, Mm-hmm. That's why there's a reason he's going around and going to those conservative women and all that stuff where the lady walked out, and just basic things. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, just the whole thing. It was really joyful.
I think it's a good commentary on everything. Like Brandon and I were saying, it's like multiple levels. Like on the surface level, you would say like one of the scenes in the movie is that the pandemic hits and Borat is running around in the streets and he comes across this guy who's like sort of the typical right-wing bearded Carhartt baseball hat, camouflage wearing, pickup truck driving guy. And the guy, of course, is nice enough to like let him come into his house. And so the commentary there at the surface level, of course, is that he's like making fun of this person. But of course, if you're not a total jerk off, you also recognize that like, oh, this person was nice enough to take him in. And then he goes into the house and this good old boy's friend is there. And it just goes from there. And I am not going to give too much away if you haven't seen it. But nonetheless, it's a hilarious set of scenes in that segment of the movie. And yeah, I mean, they all like, they also help him find his daughter. So it's like there's all these contradictions throughout the movie. And that's obviously what makes it so interesting, and how people overlook those contradictions is beyond me. But fortunately, the overwhelming response is that people love the film and that it's like number one in the world. And, you know, to the degree that movies have an impact anymore, or that people haven't already made their minds up, I would say it, you know, probably has a good chance of getting Biden many thousands more votes, because it's definitely a pretty damning indictment of the Trump administration's response to COVID. And they've got Pence and Trump in there making like just ridiculous statements from earlier in the year about how COVID is no big deal and it's going to go away. And of course, now when everybody's watching this, there's 250,000 people dead. So yeah, I thought it was great. Please do yourself a favor and watch it.
Definitely watch it.
We'll watch it again. And then, of course, the reaction to it gets to another podcast another documentary that we watched on Amazon. No Safe Spaces, I think was the name of it.
Yeah, okay. No Safe Spaces.
No Safe Spaces. So, okay, right off the bat, yes, there's some right-wing blowhards in the documentary. Right off the bat, yes, many of them are hypocrites. Why are they hypocrites? Because many of them have either played a significant role in getting professors fired or tossed off campuses for critical views of Israel.
Yep.
So, you know, the Dershowitzes and so on who are featured in this movie are just, you know, they're totally full of shit, and it's a shame that they put them in there. But this is the terrible contradiction of what's happening right now, is that you have so many people on the left who have bought into this cancel culture shit, and it has seeped into the professional liberal class so much that it has just totally warped the entire left culture that we have. It's warped the pop culture that we have in this country, which is even scarier. As a response, the people speaking out about free speech, the people speaking out about safe spaces and trigger warnings and all this crazy shit that the left, goofy factions within the left and largely on university campuses, I should say, came up with, is right-wingers. You know, these are the people who are, you know, and liberals, like really staunch liberals. So, and I mean that in the classical sense too, you know, small L liberal and large L liberals who are defending free speech right now. And we've long talked about this. You and I have warned about this on the left since at least 2012, 2013, long before the Evergreen incident with Brett Weinstein.
Well, it started 2011, especially during, I think it was more visible when we had a convention here in Chicago that we organized.
That was 2013.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Oh, shit. Yeah, it was 2013.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, it's been about 7 years, about 7-8 years that we've seen this and we've been speaking out about it. And it got us into trouble with national organizations that we were once members of. It's gotten us into trouble with various institutional powers
used against us, too.
On the left. Yeah, and it was used against us. And instead of sort of running away from the left or denouncing it, because I do believe in the basic political project of, you know, coming up with an alternative to capitalism and finding ways to live in more egalitarian fashion, a little more collectivity, making sure people have health care, making sure private interests aren't allowed to just plunder the earth, all that kind of stuff that the left is worried about. You know, those are things that I care about. So just because there's a bunch of shitheads on the left doesn't mean that I'm going to give up my ideals or principles. So in any case, I don't mean to go on some kind of diatribe, but the documentary is worth watching. I would say 50% of it is on the money. 50% of it is probably just total bullshit, right-wing propaganda. They're
neoliberal.
Yeah, they try to mix in all the Horatio Alger, like pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
And no systemic analysis, basically. There's no, it's very individual and very self-responsibility. But otherwise, no, I mean, it's...
But people should check it out. And the reason people should check it out is because, you know, we actually do have an issue. And that issue is that what people think of as the dominant left, and you know, in mainstream culture, people lump liberals, progressives, and communists, socialists, anarchists into one group.
Yep.
So in case you haven't noticed, and I say this to both camps, both my liberal friends and my leftist friends, I mean, the right doesn't give a fuck which one you are. They hate you and they want you dead, some of them at least. And it would be wise for you to, I think, see your interests as being united. And I also think that it would be wise for people to take up the mantle of free speech on the left again. And I know this tradition varies in different countries, because when I was in Australia, they don't have free speech laws there, and they don't have a constitution and a Bill of Rights in the way that we do. And so it was hard for them to understand what I meant, because they actually do have laws about hate speech and things like this, and we don't. And yeah, I found myself obviously in a very isolated position there, debating with people on the left, because people on the left wanted to curtail free speech rights in the aim of protecting people from feeling bad about things that people say. And of course there's limits on speech here too, but it's not hate speech. Here, the only limits on speech is you can't incite a riot, you can't incite violence, and you can't incite, like falsely claim that there's a fire or something like that. I forget how the official wording is, but those are like the three things you can't do.
Well, and it's my main point would be also is that if the left feels like we don't, how would I say it even better? I think we just have to take a responsibility and be like, okay, if there are forces that we disagree with, we need to find ways and means of countering those arguments and conversations. So whether it's conversations, debates, specific, whatever it has to be, one. That's extremely important. Second point, democracy an ever-evolving mechanism. There's like no definitive democracy. Like it's an evolving, and I think people have to understand it. And sometimes I feel I see, and maybe I even probably felt it myself before getting really involved and kind of getting into more information, that there's like a specific, certain ending, definitive meaning of what democracy is, and freedom of speech as well. So, especially freedom of speech. And that's, it's something I always think about, and I tell people, specifically in the immigrant diaspora communities, is that whether, obviously each system has its faults and different things that need to be fixed by the people. But coming here, like basic things like that. Like I was talking to my mom a couple of days ago. I wouldn't be able to say things that we've been saying for past 15 years, even in Ukraine. Like you would probably just get popped, or you end up in a car accident, and so, it's really important to utilize it and see it, utilize it, and, understand that it's an ever evolving thing that we have to fight for, and constantly. And even if it means going, even going against the mainstream wave of specific group that you're part of, like the left, certain parts that do push, that type of safe spaces, and so it's just I think people have to understand democracy as like this ever evolving thing that we have to fight for, and constantly be aware of different forces. And that's and it went from political institutions and social movements and the universities, and then is spread specifically now at the mainstream social media. And this is where it's finding, like, it's really able to dictate our speech and dictate what people can say, what can't say, what they can do, what they cannot do. And I think it's spreading everywhere, and I think we have to be extremely cautious of it, but also not fall into this hyper or neoconservative approach to it, like in that film.
Yeah, well, the way that'll happen is if people who aren't hyper-conservative people speak up about the issue. So, the only way to combat it is if people speak up, and if people speak loudly about, free speech, what it means, why it's important. And people should start doing that more and more, because it's going to be used against us in ways that people can't possibly imagine right now. And at that point, there won't be much people can do about it. So I think it's extremely important. And I think it's also extremely important for people to develop their own cultural means, because if you rely on pop culture, and if pop culture is dominated by this type of thinking, which it is, and even more and more so by the day, then you're going to need individual, independent forms of media and culture that can counter that. So that gets right back to, making your own movies, developing your own books and literature, art, music, all that stuff. So you have an alternative to plug people into, and hopefully to encourage them to create their own culture and all that stuff. But yeah, I really, really hate the fact that this is like the only, I mean, it sucks that you have two fucking dorks like Adam Carolla and whatever the other guy name is, no, that's an old, I can't remember his name, Dennis Prager, I think, from Prager University or whatever bracket this guy started. But yeah, it's terrible. It's just like these two guys are gonna hold up the mantle of free speech. I mean, and then there were a couple of progressive leftists in the documentary, including Cornel West, and there's him and see, that's the thing is like, as much as stuff needs to grow and change, it's like the Bernie phenomena. Everybody gave Bernie shit for being old, but it was like he's one of the oldest guys in the Senate. He's one of the oldest guys elected to office in the U.S., but he's got like some of the best ideas. Yep. So it's like not just because something's young or new is it good inherently. And I keep thinking the same thing with free speech. So the counter to, I do agree with you. I mean, democracy it's an ideal. It's not a set program or something. That's something we should talk more about. But the opposite angle of that is like, I don't know how much our concepts of free speech should evolve. I mean, in other words, I kind of think that sometimes we do have things nailed. It's like sometimes people do develop something and there's not much more you can do to develop that concept. Now, obviously, we have to think about, there are new things today. Okay, so social media. So how should we govern that? We agree it should be a public entity. Well, that's actually something to mention about the documentary. They don't say it, but they do sort of allude to the fact that social media platforms such as Twitter and Facebook should be publicly owned, that they're private entities, and this is a problem because they serve a public function.
Implicitly.
So, I mean, that might be one of those issues where you get some overlap from the right and the left, and if the right can do a good enough job and if the left can do a good enough job of pressuring their senators, I think the House members will be easy on this one, but the senators have much more of those institutional connections to those large corporations, outside of obviously the House members who are in districts where those corporations operate. But that's limited in the U.S. So it's like, yeah, you might get a challenge in the Senate, but if you get people from the left and the right who can pressure their people and be like, look, we want to make these things a public utility, I think that would be one of the greatest fights to have, and it's over a real issue. It's over an important issue. Yep. And one that everybody should care about. But that's something actually positive that I would take away from the movie, is that they do, sort of allude to that idea, and they make the critique, that's good. It's better than if they said the opposite. So that's, something to think about. I mean, obviously Elizabeth Warren seemed to be the most coherent on this issue. There's people who spoke to it in sort of a principled, moral way. But Warren seemed to be the only one who had like a really clear idea of exactly what that legislation would look like and how it would function, and how the whole process would go along. But yeah, I think that's one of the first things we should be talking about, because it is dangerous that these entities have the power that they have. They should be governed by the same rules that any kind of, you should be able, the Bill of Rights should matter in a public forum that is a public forum. And on the other hand, there's going to be a lot of sophisticated technology that obviously needs to be developed. And it's much more strict now, as you're finding out, because you're in Facebook jail.
30 days.
But it's, it is no longer the Wild West. I mean, I remember back during the war in Libya, the coup, whatever you want to call it, the pictures that were being floated around at that time would not be allowed to be floated around, nor would the banter back and forth. So that was, of course, when Benghazi happened and all the rest. And when that happened, there were people just like posting like, all these right wingers were like Barack Obama should hang and we should assassinate him. I mean, people I think have short memories, and I do think people forget that no less than 7, 8 years ago, no less than 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago, the social media was really the Wild West, and people said whatever the hell they wanted. So it's probably good that that's being regulated to some degree. I don't think that everybody threatening each other with violence and these types of things are good. But I also think that the best way to counter this stuff isn't through official policy as much as it is through people collectively sort of holding each other accountable and being like, hey, that's not cool. Don't speak like that. And like any other form of peer pressure, I just think it works. And I think in any context it matters, and people don't want to be on the outside, and people don't want to be shunned by their peers. And if you're saying stupid shit and people just kind of say, hey, Vince or Sergio, this stuff is not cool, and whatever, it makes a difference.
No, it is. And I was actually, after that film, I was thinking about Belarus, what's going on right now. And the interesting, and like, this is where the power of freedom of speech kind of presented well, because if you look at that country, it has one of the lowest income inequalities. It has a lot of their things are public institutions. And it's just, in terms of economy and the infrastructure, they're like one of the top ones in the world. They're like in the top 40, top 30 countries. But people want to be able to speak, they want to voice their concerns. They want to voice their whatever. Yeah. And, people have been there in the streets for months now. And I think it's important, like it's really important to consider those things and understand that, there are a lot of people around the world that, striving for this, and we have it here. And for us, it's basically to retain it and maintain it. And for other people, they're up the hill, we're on the hill. Like it's just trying to stay on the hill. People are trying to climb up the hill. And, I think it's definitely something for all of us to think about.
Well, it gets back to the left in this country just not being nuanced about much. And so then, there's just a view that everything the United States is and does is terrible and bad, and there's nothing redeeming about, the United States. And it's not helpful not only domestically, but it's not helpful also to understand the global context. Yep. It's just not. And
rejective, highly rejective of everything.
Yeah.
Extremely. It's been like a big silly theme. Yeah, it's
not really helpful, but nonetheless, check it out. See what you think. You can, I'm sure, decide for yourself. And we also watched. What else did we watch? We watched Tales from the Hood, which was fucking badass.
Wow.
Sergio had never seen it before. The first time that I saw it, my dad took me to the theater in 5th grade. To watch it, and I don't think it was what he thought it was going to be, because he's not a big fan of horror films, which is even better, nor is he the biggest fan of hip-hop culture, which makes it even that much better. So it's both of those things in one movie, but it's a pure 90s horror anthology produced by Spike Lee and some of the guys who did Menace to Society, and I think it's 4 stories, 3.5 basically. There's like a story within a story, so there's like three or 4 stories, you could say. But it's so good.
And I love the fact that he's trying to bring out the sense of agency that people have to take in a lot of his films, a lot of this thing.
Yeah, it's not simple. It's not that's why I had posted it to social media, and I was like, this is more woke than anything that's come out since. And the reason I said that was because it not only makes an institutional critique of white supremacy and patriarchy and capitalism and materialism and, the history of slavery and all these different things, but it also really critiques the actors within it, to your point, Serge, that, who have a choice of either enabling these forms of oppression and repression or taking a stand. And the films really treat the middleman worse than anyone. So, most of the protagonists in the movie are black excuse me, a lot of their antagonists in the movie are white, except for in a couple different scenarios. And so there's, just to be clear for those who haven't seen it, the opening one is a black police officer who's with a group of white police officers, and they pull over a black city councilman and activist, and they go from there. And the black police officer, of course, doesn't take action, and he suffers because of it. And then, the second time is like a kid getting abused, and the father is the abuser, and the father's beating the mother and the child. And it's not so much enabling, although, they don't blame the mother at all, but there is this teacher who's there who just is
the only one,
like pushover.
But the only one who recognized
He was the only one who recognized it. Yeah, he recognized the bruises, and then he like kind of spoke up and tried to do something. And he did try to fight him when he came to the house, but he just got beat up. But then there's another one with my favorite one, which is a
governor race.
Yeah, a gubernatorial race, and the white racist politician is being advised by one of his top advisors is a black guy, and of course it doesn't treat him well. So it's like the movie's not only showing you like all these things about white supremacy in America, but they're also showing you like in order for white supremacy to function, it needs enough black people to buy into that in order to act as a middleman between the white supremacists and the black community. And so in that way, in my opinion, it is much more woke than a lot of the things that are out there today.
It was great. It was amazing.
I knew you would like it. I knew you were going to like it.
It was amazing.
Yeah. What else? Speaking of movies, we don't have to go too much into this, but I will say, for those listening, definitely check out on two of the documentaries that Sergio and I watched over the last week or so. One was called Heart of Darkness, which is available on Amazon, and it's about an hour and a half, 2-hour documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now, Francis Ford Coppola's film. One of Sergio and I's favorite of all times, but of all times. But yeah, make sure to check out Heart of Darkness, excellent documentary about one of the most important films ever made in this country. And check out Friedkin Uncut. That's Friedkin, Friedkin, as in William Friedkin, the director, Uncut. Yep. It's about a Chicago director, Hollywood director, one of my favorite of all time. My dad turned me on to him because he made the movie Sorcerer. In my garage at the house where I grew up, my dad had a poster of Sorcerer on the wall and would tell us how this is his favorite movie of all time. Well, one of them, I'd probably say it's one of his top 3. And Friedkin also did To Live and Die in L.A. He also did Cruising with Al Pacino. He also did The Exorcist with Linda Blair. He also did Sorcerer. I'm forgetting one in there. But nonetheless, check out William Friedkin's work. It's just unbelievable stuff. The French Connection with Gene Hackman. So yeah, French Connection, Exorcist, Sorcerer, To Live and Die in L.A., just Cruising, just some fucking phenomenal movies. He's amazing. But yeah, check out Friedkin Uncut. And then the last thing I know we wanted to rap about was UFC 254.
Oh yeah.
We could also anything else that comes up, but Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje,
monster,
for the lightweight championship, UFC lightweight championship of the world. Khabib beat Justin Gaethje in the second round via a triangle choke, but it started from the mounted position, which made it even that much more special. And then he pulled guard and wrapped it up. But
he even dominated him on the feet.
Yeah, even dominated him on the feet. And I know most of the people who are listening to these podcasts are probably not fight fans, though that will change, I think, because I'm going to start trying to interview not only some MMA journalists, but I think there'll be a way to interview some MMA fighters, which would be interesting. And so we're going to have them on and expand some of what we're doing. And, in terms of the guests and the content. And, I've been watching the sport pretty religiously for the last 6-7 years and have been a fan of it for a while, but always I was always turned off by it because of the culture, a lot of the bro-ish culture that comes along with it, a lot of goofy conspiratorial right-wing types that, Luke Thomas, the MMA journalist, speaks to this. But regardless, as a fight fan, as a fan of the sport, as a fan of big drama, it was unfucking believable, the whole lead up to the fight, the story of Khabib, where he comes from in Dagestan, the relationship with his father, the fact that his father had just passed away from COVID, and then coming into the fight 28-0, fighting in Abu Dhabi, where he has a devout Muslim fan base, and winning in an impressive fashion in the second round and dominating one of the best lightweights in the world, and then he retires after the fight.
Yep. He doesn't want. His mom asked him not to fight there without his father.
Yeah, and I have a hard time. People are questioning it, but I was like, if I know his ethnic roots well enough, and if I know his religious commitments, I highly doubt that he's gonna break his word to his mom and come back and fight, unless his mom gives him the okay.
Or unless she's really concerned that he's going to catch COVID because of this. And maybe when the COVID is over, maybe she'll feel a little bit better about it, Because, she doesn't want to lose her son from COVID. Obviously fighting as well. There's always...
She's not worried about that, though, because nobody's going to kill Khabib.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody's killing Khabib. But, yeah, it was impressive, and I felt good for the guy. I'm always happy to see people who have been through a lot of stuff to, I think you used the metaphor earlier, but to make it to the mountaintop is, it's something special. And he's the antithesis of everything that the flashy sort of American or, slash European slash, there's plenty of Latino, flashy Latino fighters as well. But there's not too many flashy Asian fighters. It's weird how you can kind of hop around the globe and see these different sort of demeanors that these fighters have. But he's the antithesis of somebody like Conor McGregor. And so what's interesting about a guy like Khabib is in a world of, superficiality and materialism and sex and drugs and all. Again, some of those things I enjoy. It's not like I'm not superficial or materialistic at times, but it is refreshing to see someone who breaks that mold and who is so different, and he's this very committed Muslim, highly disciplined family man, stays away from the camera, lives a private life. It's cool. It's really cool.
And he grew up in the rough. That's a rough place. The conflict there is an ongoing thing. The contribution to the incorporation of these tribal societies into very structured communist sphere, and that created a lot of conflict in those regions. And then obviously a large amount of people from Crimea, where I was born, were deported in the 40s after World War II to those areas. And so like this weird intermixing different Russian ethnics who were working there. And so, yeah, it's always been very intense area.
Yeah, I remember, I think I told you this story when we were watching the fight, but I remember an interview, or I don't know if it was an interview or a press conference where somebody was talking shit to Khabib. And I remember him saying, I didn't grow up where you grew up. And this guy was like, I grew up in a tough neighborhood. And Khabib was like, he's like, no, brother. He's like, you don't understand. Like, he's like, no, you don't. Like, when I say tough neighborhood, I don't mean that like somebody might shoot it out on your block. I mean, like, your fucking house might get shelled, and there might be like patrolling armies that come through your village or your town and like ransack your house and take people captive and torture people. And that we don't have to go into all of it, but it's like
food shortages.
Yeah, it's a totally different. Water shortages, infrastructure that doesn't work, electrical grids that are out, hospitals that aren't set up, people having kids at home. Yes, that happens in parts of the United States. It does not happen at the scale or disproportionately in the way that it happens other parts of the world, and I think that's hard for people to wrap their minds around. And I think sometimes in people's pursuit to make a critique of the United States, sometimes in people's pursuit to correctly point out how many people live in poverty in the United States, I think we sometimes make that mistake of, saying things like, oh, the poverty in Alabama is as bad as it is anywhere else in the world. And it's like, well, okay, for some families, it's true that they're, if you look only at certain indicators, like do they have X amount of calories, some things like this. But if you add some of these other factors, like do they have X amount of calories and is there a chance that their house might get bombed next week? It's like, well, no. You know what I mean? Yeah. And they can only eat 500 calories or 1,000 calories a day, and they might have to be refugees for the next 6 years. No. I mean, so anyway, I don't want to go too into that because there's no reason to play the oppression Olympics, but I do think it's important. And when I think of somebody like Khabib, it shows. It's just this person's cut from a different cloth. They have a different background. And I tremendously respect the guy, and I really wish him the best because I actually hope he does stay retired unless he comes out and fights GSP. But other than that,
and the only one positive, well, not only one positive, but one positive thing out of the Soviet Union that came up there, even in relation to him, is the huge funding for social programs, gyms. Even though when the Soviet Union collapsed, all those cats who were in the gyms joined the mafia in different groups to make a living because all the funding was cut. But nonetheless, like it's a very cultural thing, and they still have those things. And now you might have to pay it, just to maintain and for salaries. But general, that's it's a very cultural thing of having these social place, all kinds of social programs and institutions.
Dude, and it's the perfect antidote to the gun culture. I mean, this is the thing: is like if you want to get these kids. It's tough because in one way, yes, it's true. You do play into some level of like hyper masculinity to some degree. So if you take a community of impoverished people who are shooting each other with guns because they're in poverty and they're desperate and they're killing each other over petty drugs and gang violence and all this other shit. It is true that if you just throw down a bunch of boxing gyms and MMA gyms, that you're also going to have a bunch of people who probably don't have the emotional capacity to process the capacity to process their emotions, so they're not just like beating each other up then. So in other words, does it switch from just guns to people then just fighting all the time? It's true that martial arts brings a sense of discipline to you, but it's not enough. I know plenty of people who have been into martial arts who are also fucking totally crazy and they like to get into bar fights and all that shit. Then it gets back to what is your community atmosphere, what's your family structure like, what's your social network of friends like, do they support that kind of behavior and all the rest. So I do think it's deeper. All that said, I think one of the most positive things we could do in communities where there's a ton of gun violence is to put MMA gyms in there to get that energy out, to also level the playing field in terms of people's aggression. So it's like, okay, if Sergio and I have a beef with each other, let's not. So there's two things that happen. One is you can handle that beef without somebody getting killed. And the second thing that happens is, unlike that beef taking place in the streets, meaning you meet someone in a parking lot or outside of a party or a bar or wherever the fuck and you throw down with them, that could lead to an embarrassing situation where you humiliate the person or that person humiliates you in a public space, which then causes you to want to go home and commit even more violence. Well, in the controlled setting of a gym, number one, it's safe. No one's going to get killed. I mean, there's always a chance somebody can get killed having a fight, so I can't say that. But the chances of you getting killed are cut by like 99%. As opposed to you shooting it out with someone you have a beef with. And then the second thing is, in a controlled environment like a gym, even the person who wins, the point is not that you're going to embarrass that other person. It's that you might have won this fight, but there's somebody else in the gym that can beat you. So you always stay humble. And then the point is just to get this person to learn or maybe they had a legitimate beef and they just got beaten. So you know what I'm saying?
And
though
you
there's
hug afterwards when you're
that's
in
what
a
I'm
controlled
saying.
environment.
That's what I'm saying. Like you
That's
hug
what it
afterwards.
is.
Like nobody's gonna go home and be like, okay, well I'm getting a gun now and I'm gonna come back and do this to you because you embarrassed me in front of all these people in public. It's like, oh, I lost this fight. Oh, and that guy's picking me up to hug me. Oh, and everybody else in the gym is supportive and, you know, talking to me after practice and like trying to help me get better or whatever. It's just such a different environment. But you also can deal with some of that petty shit that people, you know, just need to get out. And I think there's just something that exists in left culture, progressive culture, where people don't think these things are going to happen, or they want to pretend as if they're not going to happen if we just talk nicely about them, instead of just dealing with the reality as it is and being like, okay, men, unfortunately, are going to scrap with each other. And so instead of doing that on the street, or instead of doing it with weapons and killing a bunch of innocent people, let's give people venues that not only allow them to get that out in a more productive way, but might actually teach them some extra skills along the way, make them a better person, create better bonds, so on and so on.
You can't escape a biological curse too, you know.
What do you mean?
Testosterone.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all those things. I mean, yeah, let's be real about it, and that's what it is.
Yeah, no, that's another thing. We won't get into it today because there's not enough time. Well, there is, I guess, all the time in the world with COVID, but you don't want to hear us rap about this for another hour. But yeah, we do need to have more people on the program from the natural sciences, which is something that people from the left really get away from. And I think, you know, the more people hear from really thoughtful biologists and evolutionary biologists and anthropologists and other people. Well, I'm sorry, not anthropologists. Ecologists was the word I was looking for. It gives people a different perspective. So,
I mean, how many people pay attention in their biology or chemistry class?
Yeah, no, not too many. Not too many people.
Exactly. You know, so you miss out kind of on the basics of certain things.
But like evolutionary biologists, right away, like there's a good one that Brett Weinstein, who's in the Safe Space documentary, the gentleman who ran out of Evergreen State. I'm actually going to have. I definitely want to get a hold of him. I want to have him on the program. But his wife Heather, they have a podcast called the Dark Horse Podcast, and shit, I forgot where I was going with this. Jesus Christ.
About biology, evolutionary biology.
She's an evolutionary biologist, and to listen to her talk about evolutionary biology is really interesting. And she, you know, and she's liberal, you know what I mean? So it's another one of these things where it's like, she's not some crazy right winger. Like she's actually progressive liberal person. So, but she's taking an unorthodox view in terms of what the common discourse is now on the left, or again, even in pop culture, like that there's no differences between men, people who are born biologically as men and people who are born biologically as women, and that every bit of us as a social construct is really, really dangerous.
And it's basic. I mean, in the rap, like it's Trumpism. I mean, literally, basically fucking intellectual and anti-science. Like this is what it is. Like I don't, you know, whether you're left or right or center or whatever. Like no, it's completely crazy, and it's really dangerous, and it's Trumpism.
Well, this is going to get into a whole nother thread of things that we will talk about in future programs because it's an important strain of thought, and that is the left and biology and science and the strains of anti-counter enlightenment that infect the left. All right, but that's probably enough for us today. What else? You got anything else?
The only thing I got left, because I know it's happening, even though I've been watching with Amy Barrett. I just want to tell people, like, this is how you fight. We gotta fight like the conservatives. Like they go all the way in, they use everything they got, and they just go after it, no matter what the social contract they might have. So I mean, it's obviously extremely bad news, but
like I just posted to Facebook, man. You know, Jane McAlevey had a video that she put out like last year, and she was just like, look, like you got three approaches to organizing in the U.S. You got courts, you've got the electoral system, and you got workplace organizing. And she's like, the courts are done. She's like, and she was making this video after Kavanaugh got confirmed. And she was just like, forget about lawsuits. We're going to lose every time in the courts. The courts are done. She's like, so this gets back to like focus on the electoral, focus on workplace organizing, focus on communities and social movements and stuff like that, because otherwise, there's no hope for the courts. They were probably done once Trump got elected, knowing he was going to appoint 2 or 3, and now that it's over with, I agree with her. So
absolutely.
But yeah, anyway, we'll talk to y'all soon.
Bye.